Should we turn off the lights?
It's okay.
It's okay. Alright, so first of all, sorry for the delay. We're running a little bit behind in today's schedule in general, as you might have seen the transport situation. So this is a little talk that I gave at Eurocon this year. And like most of the talks that I do, I knew next to nothing about this subject, so I picked it up so that I can investigate a little bit about it. But it has been a weird fascination of mine for a while. So, how did this all happen? 2 years ago, or maybe, was it 2 years ago? We went to another Bulgakon in Kırjavik, and that was the beginning of the month. It was a long holiday, so I used the opportunity to travel south to Greece and had some vacation on the island of Samothraki. It's a very lovely island, not one of the famous Greek islands nowadays, but it used to be. And unlike most of the other Greek islands, it's very green. It's very verdant, there's lots of waters and waterfalls. And this has curiously attracted a lot of hippies on the island, and yoga people, and all sorts of spiritual crowds. And maybe this has something to do with the fact that 3,000 years ago, Samothraki was famous for the very same thing, attracting weird people. It was the site of the so-called Samothraki mysteries, which was one of the mystery religions of Greece. Some say it predates the Greek religion and mythology that we know, with the Olympians and the Titans, etc., etc. Some say it predates the arrival of Indo-Europeans in Greece. And there's this ruin on the island called the Sanctuary of the Old Gods, that people who came to the island would see from aboard the ships before they landed in the harbor. And nowadays it doesn't look much, but back in the day it must have been pretty spectacular, covered by all the pine trees. And it probably evoked a sense of mystery, which was what this was all about. So in ancient Greece, there was this concept about the mystery religions, of a tradition that you can't really talk about, that you have to be initiated into, and it stays a secret. But once you become privy to the secret, then you obtain some sort of truth that is not obvious to the other people. So for obvious reasons of definition, we don't really know what was the Samothraki mystery. But we know that very famous people felt compelled to participate in it, including Philip and Alexander of Macedon, and some of the greatest philosophers and politicians of the day. So why was that special though? And investigating this, I delved into the concept of mysticism, which is a word in the English language, and not only in the English language. It's been, you might say, misused, but it's not the correct term, most likely understood in very different manners. So what is mysticism? Going back to the Greek origin, it comes from the word myo, which means to close, to conceal something that's invisible to the eye. Mystikos was the translation for an initiate, so one that participates in the mysteries. And further down the line, for example, when the Bible was translated into Greek a couple of centuries later, the Bible uses the word mieo, which means to shut your eyes and shut your mouth. And maybe that's how you can arrive at the truth. But what truth is that? That is probably the question. And then a related word is obviously the word mysterium, which means hidden and secret, which nowadays we understand a little bit different from mystic and mysticism, but they are obviously quite related, and they used to be. So, with the passage of time, traditionally mysticism came to be understood in a very religious sense. So it departed from the idea of the mystery, of the secret, of the hidden, and shifted to the religious sense, but again with a subset of something secret. So it became the concept of understanding religious teachings in a way that's not obvious to the eye, that was not obvious to most believers of the religion. So these are some of the very famous mystical traditions of the most popular world faiths. For the Jewish faith, we have, of course, the Kabbalah, which is probably what most people think of when they hear the word mysticism. But all the other religions actually have mystical traditions. For the Christians, it was the so-called Theoria, which was very popular in the early Middle Ages. For the Islamic, that's of course the Sufi tradition. Even the Buddhist so-called religion, which we might say is very akin to mysticism itself, has its own mystical tradition called the Vajrayana. And all of these mystical traditions seek something we understand as communion. So the sense of perceiving, understanding, but not with your mind, God in some way. So feeling connected to God in a sort of experience that you can't really describe. So this is what became with the passage of time, the understanding of mysticism. A sense of communion with the divine. But obviously all the other very related terms keep being used and keep being relevant to this discussion. For example, we have esotericism, which is maybe akin to the mysteries that we talked about, to understand something hidden, something that's occult. And also the Kabbalah has a lot of this, right? Understanding texts from the Bible in a non-obvious manner. What do they mean? What maybe did God intend using these particular words? And we have the word metaphysics, which also gets very confused with mysticism. Metaphysics rather is the understanding of the inner workings of the world. So again, some sort of hidden truth that's not obvious, that's not on the same level of understanding as the physical understanding of the world and scientific that we use nowadays. So something beyond physics, metaphysics. And then obviously we have the current understanding of the word mystery, which is just something that we don't know about. So all of these terms are somehow related, and throughout history they have been used to some extent interchangeably. But we need some sort of definition to continue this conversation, so I took the one from the Oxford English Dictionary, to be very exact. So the dictionary defines mysticism as spiritual union with God, transcending human comprehension. And then a guy, a researcher called Nicholas Gear, who delved a lot into these topics, allowed himself to, provide something additional, not just God, but some sort of ultimate reality. And this is because understanding the history of this concept, he distinguishes 5 types of mysticism. So the dictionary one, union with God, with the divine, understanding of the divine in some non-obvious to the mind manner, he calls theistic mysticism. But there's also the monistic mysticism, which is maybe more akin to the Taoist tradition or the Eastern traditions, or maybe the philosophical approach to religion itself, to Christianity itself. This is being one with the absolute, being one with the nothingness. So if any of you is familiar with Buddhism, this is a very popular concept of Buddhism, the dissolution of the ego, and sort of being one with a networked reality that is all one. Again, from a Taoist perspective, this is the same thing as nature itself, right? So what Nicholas Gear calls natural mysticism is the feeling of being one with nature. And sometimes you don't need to be very mystical about it. If you know that famous painting of a guy with only his back, hopped on the top of the mountain and seeing the vast expanse of the sky ahead of them. sometimes we feel that if we go into nature, we see there's something very beautiful and maybe the sunset. And we kind of feel a little bit of that, like this sense of being one with the world. Nicholas Geary investigated artists, musicians in particular, and how they sort of connect to their instrument, become one with their instrument. And in fantasy, this is a popular trope of being one with your sword when you're fighting, right? It's the same kind of idea. That you step back from the way you usually perceive the world and become one with the reality around you. And then, of course, there's the so-called chemical mysticism, which is all the rage nowadays, but again, it's nothing new. It has been with us since the Stone Age and probably before that, which is ingesting any sort of chemical substances that alter your perception of reality. And it is very commonly the case, at least with the natural substances, so not the synthetic ones, that many people who take them report the same kind of feeling of being one with the universe, feeling all people connected, all living beings connected. So historians have argued that maybe the Greek mysteries back in the day was nothing really that different from ingesting some sort of chemicals, and this is how they obtained this hard truth. Yeah, this is again from Wikipedia. It sort of repeats the same concept, but it stresses upon this particular aspect of feeling ecstatic, feeling in a way that can't really be explained, feeling, let's say, over the top, something that is not usually perceivable by the senses. And so it usually leads to some sort of transformation from the human mind that can't usually perceive the reality in this manner. And again, this in a way, people perceive this as obtaining some sort of higher truth of understanding. Is it really a truth of understanding? We don't know. But that's how supposedly it feels. And so if we combine all of these definitions throughout history, we can arrive at some sort of narrow down the concept in a way. So mysticism is an experience that has to be ineffable. So this means it can't really be explained through language means. It can't really be made available to the mind. It is something that can only be perceived, but can't really be explained. And then the second focal point is union, so feeling one with something else, with the ultimate reality, with people, with God. So being made aware of some sort of connection that's not immediately obvious. And again, if you know a little bit about Buddhism, this feels a lot about Buddhism. So a lot like Buddhism. It's not really that different. Maybe that's true to a case. Maybe Buddhism is one approach to arrive at the mystical experience. But as I mentioned, it is also the case that not all Buddhism is considered mystical by Buddhists themselves. So it's again a question of how you arrive at this higher truth. Do you do this through meditation? Or do you do this through any other kinds of means that seems meaningless at the start, but connects you? Obviously also the Tao, the Taoist tradition is very similar to what we're talking about here. Dissolving yourself and just letting yourself go with nature. And some might say mysticism is very akin to psychosis, or any sort of condition that lets you perceive reality in a way that's not how you usually understand it. So it is very difficult maybe to understand this mysticism actually something different from an outer state of mind. But definitely what all of these experiences, regardless of how you arrive at them, make you feel about is inner understanding of some sort of higher truth about how the world operates. This is a very brief introduction about what is mysticism to those of you who haven't really investigated this topic. But since this is of course a science fiction convention, now we have to talk about what about fiction? How is this entire concept translated into fiction? fiction, or is it at all? Is it interesting for science fiction and fantasy? So the topic that I originally, the title that I originally picked for this topic before even delving into the matter was gods, strangers, and wizards, because in a way those three kind of character tropes bring with them something secret, right? Usually is the case. And then I did some sort of a brief off the top of my mind listing of some gods, and we have Thor and Odin famously, obviously from the Norse mythology, but in our context, from Marvel. Thor and Odin are really that either mysterious, let alone mystical, right? They're just some buff guys who do strange stuff. The Cthulhu is a little bit more mysterious. It comes out on the world in manners that are not very understood. But it doesn't really take you to the higher truth, it mostly seeks to destroy everything and everyone, so maybe that's not it. I've listed here the 7 from A Song of Ice and Fire. Sadly, we never get to see any of them, so we don't know what they are really about. They're more like Christian level religion. We have Om from Terry Pratchett, a very interesting kind of god, but he is very demystified, right? He's not really that mystical. We have all these stranger characters that also come out as mysterious, but are quickly demystified in the plot, and same goes for the wizards. With Gandalf, it's a particularly interesting example because he starts very non-mysterious, like a common kind of village wizard, and then he becomes a little bit more mysterious, and he's demystified again. And so I investigated all of these characters, and I was thinking, okay, can I find any nugget of mysticism here at all? The answer was no. And so I think that's the end of this talk, right? Yeah, not really. There is, of course, a lot of mystical tradition in science fiction and fantasy itself. A very curious example from the start of the previous century is C.S. Lewis, who is mostly famous for his Christian-leaning works. But he has this book called You Have Faces that touches a lot upon this sort of mystical experience. The book is a sort of, artistic retelling of a Greek legend about Pygmalion. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's not that interesting because a side character from the original legend, which is the sister of the main character, is the main character in the book. And so she's very bitter, and at some point she forsakes society and goes into nature. And this is what we hear about her understanding being on the verge of death in nature, and maybe having opened her senses. That opens the door out of a little dark room. That's all the life we know about. So again, this is the simple truth, not the higher truth. This is what we live in, the small dark room. A little bit akin to Plato's cave, right? Into a great, real place that's somehow more real, where the true sun shines and we shall meet. So again, we see this concept of something more real than what we have, something true that's beyond our reach in a way. In The Wheel of Time, not a book that you would usually think about as mystical, we have this very being in the divine presence experience described when Demon Dread meets the Dark One. He doesn't meet him for the first time, but we see it for the first time. He says something like, ecstasy, pain, a voice exploded in his head. To call it a voice was to call a mountain a pebble. It nearly crushed him. It filled him with rapture. He sank to his knees. So we see, again here, the author trying to pass to us this same experience of being in the divine's presence. That's not really explainable, right? He tries to explain it, but it's not explainable. Even Brandon Sanderson, the most unmystical author that you can think of, famously super technical about everything he does, and very crafty, not that poetic. But he tries to do the same thing, actually, of a character being in the presence of the divine, that he can't really explain with human words, right? How could he face something so vast, so incredible, permeating the land, the people, the sky, the stone. He would break, go insane if he tried to comprehend his being. Or another, take it the same, further down the book. Burning, overwhelming, power, the scream of 1,000 warriors. So you see the metaphors, but he can't really explain what's going on. The sorrow of loss, the joy of victory, hatred. He couldn't explain it. It was the heat of 1,000 suns, the bliss of every kiss, the lives of all men wrapped up in one. So all of these are attempts in literature to make us privy to that same experience of perceiving something that we can't really explain, that is beyond us. This is called Bahar, the second apocalypse. Such glorious horror. I am whole in its presence. So again, the presence and myself is now being whole because I'm in this presence, right? Speaking truth, unthinkable, unlivable truth. Again, this understanding of something that I didn't previously, I was unable to understand otherwise. There was no explaining this. The inverse fire cannot be told, it must be seen. And again, this makes you think of some other famous character saying the same thing, right? No one can tell you what the Matrix is, you have to see it for yourself. So all of this, again, touches the same thing that we arrived at when we talked about the definition, some understanding of the higher truths. And what I'm going to argue about in this talk is that this is not just authors being inspired by the concept of mysticism, consciously or not consciously, or just culturally, and trying to bring it into the books. I'm going to argue that the whole concept of science fiction and fantasy is about arriving at this sort of higher truth, of understanding how reality is constructed and being able to change it, to transform it in non-physical matters. Or you might just call it magic. In the second apocalypse that I just quoted, magic is very technically understood as the characters who have the magical abilities being able to read the script of God, so the script of the universe is written, and being able to change it, so change the words of the script. So again, this is understanding these truths intellectually, or in their case, not intellectually, and being able to change it. And this concept about naming things and changing things, and understanding the name of something as being its true meaning, so some sort of name that can be spoken, as you well know, is very, very prevalent in fiction, right? In here we have Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin herself, a very famous Taoist, which again brings us to the same concept. Understanding the truth of something is how you can understand its true name, that maybe can't be spoken, but once you perceive it, then you have power over reality itself. Obviously, the same concept is developed in, for example, The Name of the Wind and many others, so it's pretty popular mythologically. This is a quote from The City of Illusions, The Hainish Cycle by Ursula Le Guin. And it's sort of a take on Tao Te Ching, but the way that can be gone is not the eternal way. The name that can be named is not the eternal. So the name, the way that it should be altered, the way of the truth, is not something that you can really utter with your physical body and physical voice and physical mind, if you will. It's not something that's explainable, but it's something that you can perceive for a while and immerse yourself in it. The Tao is really an action rather than a person. And it's an action which everyone can share. The more you share with everybody else, with the world, the more you approach what a theist or a deist is going to call union with Godhead, although this is not in Laozi's vocabulary. So in some sense, he's a godless mystic. So Ursula Le Guin is trying here to merge these two concepts that we talked about at the start, right? Being in the divine presence, but not really because of any sort of God, or however you understand God, but because there is an absolute concept of the universe that you are somehow attached to. This is Patrick Rothfuss that I talked about, the same concept. I'm not stopping here a lot. And because we talked a lot about fantasy, one science fiction example maybe. Hard science fiction sounds like it doesn't really go after magic or the same kind of higher truths, but in a way it does. So we have here the Space Odyssey, one of the staples of modern science fiction. And famously, we have two different takes from the book and from the movie that are not really the same. In the book, the main character arrives at some sort of artifact that's left by an alien race, and merging with it in a way, he's transformed. Right? He becomes something else that can now understand reality in ways that his human existence did not allow him to. So with eyes that already held more than human intentness, the baby he transforms into some sort of baby, stared into the depths of the moment, seeing but not yet understanding the mysteries that lay beyond. And there before him was the luminous whirlpool of the galaxy. It might have been some beautiful, incredibly detailed model embedded in a block of plastic, but it was the reality, grasped as a whole, with senses now more subtle than vision. So again, you see the same concept of having additional senses when you live in the mystical experience. And famously, his words are, "Oh my God, it's all full of stars." Philip Dick, another science fiction author, very famous for altering his state of consciousness more often than was probably necessary. He has a little bit of the same take in the Tristigmata of Palmer Eldritch, a book in which reality is overwritten all the time by some sort of drug, until it becomes very unclear, is there a drug at all, or what's going on? Is there any mind to perceive what's going on? And again, you see the same kind of wording that we saw in Lao Tzu, Ursula Le Guin, etc., etc. He was fused with the environment, so one with the environment. Yeah. I had here a little bit about Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is a very interesting, stranger kind of character. He remains very mysterious until the end, probably on purpose. Talked controversially about him a couple of times with different takes on what he intended with his character. But fans, of course, have taken this to a whole other level and made some many sorts of explanation about the powers of Tom Bombadil. Why is he not affected by the ring, etc., etc. And so, some of these explanations are also very mystical, right? They speak about the song, you remember the song by God by Iluvatar that underpins the whole of reality. And Tom Bombadil being some sort of echo of the song that remains in the world. And so this is why he's one with nature and can't really be subject to anything in nature. We will never know. What we will know is that Tom Bombadil is just the doll of Tolkien's little son, which is a very mystical knowledge that I obtained by a guy called Throwaway 112678 on Reddit. So again, this is probably the higher truth about Tom Bombadil. Another researcher and author called Ron Reger, he did a cartoon project called Cartoon Utopia, trying to, fictionalize the whole of human history in comics. And we see in him the very same drive about all these authors that we see him trying to understand this experience. In a spiritual sense, my ideas always seem to focus on some sort of attempt to explain the unexplainable. I'm trying to look through the mirror. I've never been able to really understand how or why we live in these cultures and societies that are so disconnected from reality and from earth and from the true selves. I've never sensed that anything that we see in the world is anything more than a made-up illusion. So again, this understanding that what we see here is an illusion. Of course, this, you might go back to philosophy Gnosticism, dualism, etc., etc. So it has been a very popular concept for time. It's nothing new. Maybe now we rediscover it in a way, and we put it into fiction. Yeah, these are some shots from the Eurocon that we just talked about in the previous panel. Myself putting on a t-shirt with a labyrinth. On the right is a drawing that I did on one of the workshops, and again, it's very labyrinthine. This is some art that I didn't do, but somebody else did, and again, you see the same kind of imagery often arising in contexts where people are put in SFF context or speculative context, and I think it's maybe not that random. I think this is some sort of trying to go again into this mysterious, fractal, ineffable experience. But why? Why is that? Why are we nowadays, now we super rational beings, we know much more about the world rationally than people used to know 3,000 years ago when the Samothraki mysteries was in vogue. Why do we still see that, and why do we put it into this genre that's been around for just the past couple of hundred years? I'm turning to this guy to explain it. I've talked with a lot of you about David Bowie, so I won't talk again about him. But I think he was very wise in some things that he said that addressed the very same manner. This is David Bowie in the movie Labyrinth itself, an expression of the labyrinthine and the mysterious. Incidentally, the movie that I myself get acquainted with David Bowie, but I'm not the usual case. The usual case fans of the movies are teenage girls. Maybe because of this very romantic scene with Sarah and the Goblin King. Maybe because of his very famous attire. But in any case, many years after the fact, he said this: at the turn of the 20th century, Friedrich Nietzsche proclaimed that God was dead and that man had killed him. This created an arrogance within man that he himself was God. Now obviously this is a metaphor. It's not about Nietzsche, but it's about losing the religious experience in our society. But it seems as though as God, all man could seem to produce was disaster. And so we come back here to the world wars, etc., etc. And Bowie says, this led to a terrifying confusion. For if we could not take the place of God, how could we fill the space we had created within ourselves? And I think this is very poignant in the ways that also science fiction authors have tried to address. This is Nikki Whiting writing on C.S. Lewis' Still We Have Faces, and she uses the phrase longing for holiness. And I'm thinking maybe this is a part of it, right? This is why we keep being attracted to this topic. Rediscovering, in a way, traditions that, have been around for thousands of years. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about was written in the 60s, which was very famously, a time of spirituality, maybe. Nowadays we have the ayahuasca retreats, maybe a little bit commercialized, maybe a little bit modified, but stemming from the same impulse, I think, that we feel lives in reality lacking somehow. And maybe people in Greece 3,000 years ago did also feel reality lacking to an extent. Back to the Odyssey and Stanley Kubrick. On the deepest psychological level, the film's plot symbolizes the search for God, and it finally postulates what is little less than a scientific definition of God. I don't know how scientific is it, but definitely it feels like this artifact, this understanding that they've obtained at the end is again a sort of being one with God or reality, going back to the original definition. So I think this search with or without religion, has been with us for a lot of time, but now maybe we feel it a little bit more strongly. And incidentally, science fiction, the genre of dreaming, has been with us for exactly this same amount of time, where we maybe lost some belief in the higher truth, and now we're trying to rediscover it. The best way we can, reading and writing, some of us at the back. Fiction. Thank you. Any question, comments, or we can go for coffee?
There is a theory, I do not personally believe in it, but I find it very funny, that air is a hallucinogenic substance that alters the mind of people, and we are all experiencing a huge hallucination. So, what's your opinion on this?
I think I have been through an experience which I don't remember the name of it. Maybe it's sort of holographic breathing, is it? That kind of touches on the same subject, where you deoxidize your body. So you try to just exhale very quickly, but not inhale for a while. Obviously you inhale some because you would be dead otherwise, but at some point your organs, and especially the extremities of your body, become deprived of oxygen. And then you do start hallucinating, actually. Which is very interesting, because now we have to ask the question, do we start hallucinating when we stop the oxygen, or were we hallucinating all along and now we see the real reality? I think you can play in all biochemical ways with how your brain perceives what's going on. But I'm not sure this is quite enough to feel the mystical experience. Just as food for thought, I'll give you some comment that I received back on the other lecture, and I think it's very interesting to think about what if the artificial intelligence discovers the higher truth instead of us, and how can they pass it on to us in a meaningful manner? I think this is a very interesting direction.
What if it just leaves?
How can they explain it to us? That is the question. Alright, so break time. See you guys in a while.